It all began in a small place in the Middle East, a land full of history, conflicts, and ancient promises. Today we know that land as Israel. But 2,000 years ago, no one imagined that from there would emerge a faith that would transform the entire world. Christianity was not born in Europe nor in America. It was born right here. And its history is deeply intertwined with the history of this land. In the first century, Israel was part of the powerful Roman Empire. The streets of Jerusalem were filled with pilgrims, merchants, soldiers, and religious leaders. In the midst of that setting, a Jewish preacher named Jesus of Nazareth appeared, speaking about the kingdom of God. His words were simple but profoundly revolutionary, and without many realizing it at the time, those teachings would give rise to something that would change human history. After his death, his followers began proclaiming that Jesus had risen. At first, they were just a small group of disciples, fishermen, women, farmers, ordinary people. But their conviction was so strong that they began announcing this message first in Jerusalem, then in other cities of Israel, and finally beyond its borders. This is how what we know today as the Christian origins, the beginning of Christianity, came to be. However, the history of Christianity in Israel was not simple. There were persecutions, wars, changes of empires, and profound transformations in the region. Over the centuries, Christianity passed through different eras within this land, from the early church to modern times. Each stage left its mark on the culture, religion, and history of the place where it all began. So a fascinating question arises. How did a small community of followers in Israel become a global movement that today counts more than 2 billion believers? To understand it, we need to walk through each stage of this history. And in this video, we will explore every era of Christianity in Israel, from its birth to its presence today. To understand the history of Christianity, we must return to the context of the Jewish people in the first century. Israel lived under Roman rule, and many Jews awaited the coming of a Messiah promised in the Scriptures. There was political tension, spiritual expectation, and a strong desire for liberation. It was in the midst of that setting that the movement later called Christianity began. Jesus of Nazareth began teaching in villages and cities of Galilee and Judea. His messages spoke of love for one's neighbor, forgiveness, and the kingdom of God. Crowds followed him to hear him, while other religious leaders watched with concern at the impact of his words. Even so, no one imagined that those teachings would form the foundation of one of the most influential religions in history. After his crucifixion, something unexpected happened. His followers began proclaiming that Jesus had risen. This message spread first in Jerusalem, especially among Jewish communities. The city became the center of the first Christian community, led by figures such as Peter and James. One of the key moments occurred during the Jewish Feast of Pentecost. According to ancient accounts, thousands of people heard the preaching of the apostles and decided to follow the teachings of Jesus. Thus was born the early church, a community that shared resources, teachings, and a faith that was growing rapidly. However, the growth of the movement also generated tensions. Some religious leaders considered this new teaching dangerous. Over time, persecutions against the followers of Jesus began. Paradoxically, those persecutions did not stop the movement. They drove it to spread even further. While some believers remained in Jerusalem, others began traveling to different regions of the Roman Empire. There, they proclaimed the Christian message to new communities. This was the beginning of the spread of Christianity, the process by which a faith born in Israel began to cross borders. If you are enjoying this journey through the history of Christianity in this country, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Here, we explore how Christianity arrived and developed in different nations around the world. The message that began in Jerusalem did not remain there for long. Very soon, the followers of Jesus understood that their mission was not limited to a single city or a single people. The history of the spread of Christianity began when some believers left Israel, carrying with them a message they considered transformative. that the kingdom of God was open to all. Thus, small communities began to emerge in different parts of the Roman world. One of the most influential figures in this expansion was Paul of Tarsus. Curiously, Paul did not begin as a follower of Jesus. At first, he was a Pharisee who persecuted Christians, convinced that the movement represented a threat to Jewish tradition. But his life changed radically when he decided to join the Christian movement. From that moment on, he became one of the most important Christian missionaries in history. Paul undertook long journeys to cities of the Roman Empire, such as Antioch, Ephesus, Corinth, and Rome. In each place, he first visited the Jewish synagogues, explaining how the scriptures could be interpreted in the light of Jesus' teachings. Some people accepted his message, while others rejected it. But even amid opposition, new Christian communities continued to form. What is interesting is that Christianity began to attract not only Jews, but also people from different cultures. Merchants, craftsmen, soldiers, and entire families began to adopt this new faith. This marked an important shift in the Christian origins, because the movement was no longer seen merely as a current within Judaism, but as a spiritual community open to all nations. The first churches were very different from the great cathedrals we know today. They actually met in homes. Small groups of believers shared meals, listened to the teachings of the apostles, and supported those going through difficulties. These communities were built on close relationships and a strong sense of solidarity. However, the growth of Christianity did not go unnoticed by Roman authorities. Although the Roman Empire initially tolerated different religions, Christianity began to generate unease. Many Christians refused to participate in ceremonies dedicated to the emperor or to the Roman gods, which was seen as a form of political disloyalty. This provoked moments of tension and persecution in several regions of the empire. Some believers were arrested or expelled from their communities. Even so, these events did not stop the expansion of the faith. In fact, many times the example of perseverance shown by Christians sparked curiosity in other people, who wanted to understand what motivated them to stand firm. Meanwhile, Jerusalem remained an important point for the early Christians. There, leaders of the movement gathered to debate important questions, such as the relationship between Jewish law and new non-Jewish believers. These decisions helped define the identity of Christianity as a faith that could extend beyond cultural boundaries. But the fate of Jerusalem would change dramatically in the year 70 AD, when a great Jewish revolt against Rome ended with the destruction of the city. This event marked a decisive moment for both Judaism and Christianity. Many believers abandoned the region, taking their faith to new cities of the empire. From that moment on, Christianity continued to grow in places like Asia Minor, Greece, and Rome. What had begun as a small group of disciples in Israel was slowly becoming an international movement. And although the road would be full of challenges, the history of Christianity in Israel had already set in motion a process that would transform global history. In the late 1st century, the region of Israel was living through one of the most tense moments in its history. Roman imperial rule generated constant conflicts with the Jewish population. Many groups desired independence, and political tension grew each year. Finally, in 66 AD, a great rebellion broke out against Rome. No one imagined that this conflict would profoundly change the destiny of Jerusalem and also the future of Christianity. The Roman legions responded with force. For several years, the war spread throughout the region. Finally, in 70 AD, the Roman army besieged Jerusalem. The city, which had been the spiritual center of the Jewish people for centuries, was destroyed. The Temple of Jerusalem, one of the holiest places in Judaism, lay in ruins. This event marked a before and after in the religious history of the region. For Christians, this moment also represented an important transformation. Up to that point, many believers were still deeply connected to Jewish traditions and to the religious life of Jerusalem. But with the destruction of the city, the center of the Christian movement began to shift toward other parts of the Roman Empire. especially towards cities like Antioch, Alexandria, and Rome. This shift helped accelerate the process by which Christianity ceased to be seen as a small movement within Judaism and began to develop as its own religious identity. The Christian communities that had formed in different regions began to organize with greater structure. Local leaders, written teachings, and traditions emerged to help preserve the faith. During this period, letters and accounts about the life and teachings of Jesus also began to circulate. Over time, some of these texts would become the Gospels and other writings that would form the New Testament. These documents were fundamental in maintaining unity among Christian communities that were now scattered across many regions. Despite the difficulties, Christianity continued to grow. New generations of believers appeared in different cities of the Roman Empire. Merchants, travelers, and Christian missionaries carried the message to increasingly distant places. What had begun in Israel was now slowly becoming a network of communities stretching across the entire Mediterranean. By the way, if you enjoy learning how Christianity spread to different nations, consider subscribing. In this series, we are exploring the Christian history of each country, one by one. During the first centuries after the destruction of Jerusalem, Christianity continued to grow in different parts of the Roman Empire. What had begun as small communities meeting in homes was now present in many important cities of the Mediterranean. Despite moments of persecution, the Christian faith kept expanding slowly. But no one imagined that soon an event would occur that would completely transform the history of Christianity. That change came in the 4th century, when the Roman Emperor Constantine decided to legalize Christianity. Up to that point, many Christians had lived with uncertainty within the empire. However, with this historic decision, the Christian faith ceased to be persecuted and began to gain official recognition. Over time, Christianity would become one of the most influential religions of the Roman Empire. This new setting also transformed the role of Israel within the Christian world. Places like Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Nazareth began to attract pilgrims from different regions. For many believers, visiting the places associated with the life of Jesus was a profound spiritual experience. Thus began a tradition of pilgrimage that continues to this day. During the period of the Byzantine Empire, Jerusalem became an important religious center. Churches, monasteries, and spaces dedicated to the memory of biblical events were built. One of the most well-known examples is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, considered by many to be the site associated with the crucifixion and burial of Jesus. This period strengthened Christian culture in the region. However, the history of the region was far from stable. In the 7th century, new political forces emerged in the Middle East with the expansion of Islamic empires. Jerusalem came under Muslim rule. Despite this change, Christian communities continued to live in the region, though now within a different political and cultural context. Centuries later, another dramatic episode would once again change the history of the city: the Crusades. In the year 1099, European armies arrived in Jerusalem with the aim of taking control of the city. For a time, Christian kingdoms were established in the region, but this period was also marked by conflicts and tensions among different peoples and religions. After the period of the Crusades, the region of Jerusalem and much of Israel became part of new empires that dominated the Middle East for centuries. One of the most enduring was the Ottoman Empire, which controlled the region from the 16th century until the early 20th century. During this time, Christian communities continued to live in the Holy Land, maintaining traditions, churches, and pilgrimage sites that connected directly to the Christian origins. Although Christians were a minority within the empire, different historic churches maintained a presence in Jerusalem and other important cities. Among them were Orthodox, Catholic, and Eastern communities that cared for ancient temples and preserved traditions dating back to the earliest centuries of Christianity. For millions of believers around the world, these places remained deeply sacred. At the beginning of the 20th century, the political map of the Middle East began to change rapidly. After the First World War, the Ottoman Empire collapsed and the region came under British control. This period, known as the British Mandate of Palestine, set the stage for one of the most important events in the modern history of the region. In 1948, the establishment of the modern State of Israel was proclaimed. This event profoundly transformed the political, social, and religious reality of the region. Today, Israel is home to a diversity of religious communities, including Jews, Muslims, and Christians. Although Christians represent a small portion of the population, they continue to play a significant role in the cultural and spiritual life of the country. Each year, millions of pilgrims visit Israel to see places linked to the life of Jesus and to the earliest events in the history of Christianity. Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth, and the Sea of Galilee remain central destinations for believers from around the world. These visits keep alive the connection between the global Christian faith and the land where this story began. Today, Christianity in Israel represents a blend of ancient history and contemporary life. Historic churches, local communities, and international pilgrims continue to interact in a region that has witnessed 2,000 years of transformation. And although Christianity has spread across the entire planet, its history will always be tied to this land where it all began. The history of Christianity in Israel is one of the most fascinating narratives in Christian history. It all began with a small group of disciples following the teachings of Jesus in a province of the Roman Empire. No one at that time imagined that this movement would change the history of the world. Over the centuries, Christianity underwent multiple transformations in this region, from the early church in Jerusalem, through the expansion within the Roman Empire, to the periods of empires, conflicts, and political changes that redefined the Middle East. Despite the difficulties, persecutions, and historical transformations, the Christian faith continued to exist in the land where it was born. Local communities, pilgrims, and religious leaders have kept this connection alive for more than 2,000 years. Today, when millions of people around the world practice Christianity, it is remarkable to recall that it all began in the hills, villages, and cities of Israel. There arose a message that crossed continents, cultures, and generations. And this story is just one part of a much larger panorama, the incredible expansion of Christianity across different countries and cultures throughout time. The history of Christianity in this country is just one chapter of a much greater story. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel, because in the next episode, we will explore how Christianity arrived in another country. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of Christianity in this country. God bless you and see you in the next episode.